Brindlewood, a town veiled in perpetual twilight, even on the clearest of days. The trees stood as gnarled sentinels, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The houses, old and weathered, seemed to sag under the weight of their secrets. The town was steeped in a silence so profound that it felt heavy, oppressive. In the hushed whispers that dared to break this silence, a name was often spoken. John Pork, a name that sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest souls, a name that conjured images of something monstrous, something grotesque. Legend had it that John Pork was once a man, a butcher by trade, who had met a gruesome end. They said he had been ground into his own meat grinder, his body mangled beyond recognition. Now he roamed the night, seeking to quench an insatiable hunger, a hunger for human flesh. Some dismissed it as a mere folk tale, a story to keep children from straying too far from home. But others, those who had lived in Brindlewood long enough, knew better than to tempt fate. They knew that some legends were born of truth. Jake scoffed at the tales. New to Brindlewood, his skepticism was as thick as the fog. He heard the whispers, the fearful glances, but he dismissed them as superstition. He moved to Brindlewood seeking peace from city chaos. The silence and isolation were things he craved.
I need this peace. It's so different from the city.
He spent his days exploring the woods, finding comfort in solitude. One evening as the sun set, Jake sat in his dimly lit living room. The wind howled, rattling the windows. He was engrossed in his book. He had just poured water when the phone rang, shattering the silence. The sudden ringing of the phone startled Jake, causing him to spill water on his hand. He cursed under his breath, wiping his hand on his jeans. The phone continued to ring, each ring sending a jolt of adrenaline through him. He stared at the phone, a sense of unease washing over him. It was late, far too late for anyone to be calling. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the receiver. Curiosity, however, got the better of him.
Hello?
Silence. He could hear nothing but the faint crackle of the line.
Hello?
He repeated, his voice louder this time. A low, guttural growl, barely audible, sent a shiver down his spine. It was followed by a series of heavy breaths as if someone was listening on the other end.
Who is this?
Jake demanded, his voice trembling slightly. The only response was a click as the line went dead. Jake slowly replaced the receiver, his heart pounding. He stared at the phone, his mind racing.
Who would call at this hour only to remain silent?
He tried to convince himself it was just a prank call. He walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. The wind had picked up and the trees were swaying violently. Shadows danced across the lawn, twisted by the wind. He thought he saw a figure lurking, but when he blinked, it was gone. He closed the curtains, hoping to shut out the darkness. A sudden thump from upstairs made him jump. He froze, listening intently. The sound came again, a soft thud, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. His heart pounded in his ears. He was certain now that he was not alone.
He grabbed a heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, his hand trembling as he gripped the cold metal. He moved slowly, cautiously, towards the stairs, his every sense on high alert. Each creak of the floorboards under his feet sounded deafening in the silence.
He reached the top of the stairs and paused, listening. The dragging sound came again, this time from his bedroom at the end of the hall. He took a deep breath and crept towards the sound, his grip tightening on the poker.
He reached his bedroom door and slowly pushed it open. The room was dark, illuminated only by a sliver of moonlight filtering in through the curtains. He could hear his own breathing, shallow and rapid.
And then he saw it. Standing in the shadows by the window was a figure. The figure stood motionless, its back to him, shrouded in darkness. It was tall and imposing, its shoulders broad and powerful.
Jake raised the poker, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Who are you?" he rasped, his voice barely a whisper.
The figure slowly turned, and as it did so, a flash of lightning illuminated the room, revealing its face. Jake gasped, his blood turning to ice in his veins. The face, staring back at him, was a grotesque mockery of a human visage. It was pale and fleshy, stretched taut over a skull-like frame. The eyes were small and beady, glinting with a malevolent intelligence, and the mouth was a wide, gaping maw filled with rows of jagged, uneven teeth. The creature's skin was slick and greasy, as if it had been slathered in lard.
It took a step toward him, and Jake saw that it was wearing a blood-stained butcher's apron. In its hand it held a large, rusty meat hook, the metal glinting menacingly in the dim light.
The confrontation had begun, and Jake knew this was a moment he would never forget. Terror rooted Jake to the spot, paralyzing him. He had never seen anything so utterly horrifying in his life. The creature's stench assaulted his nostrils, a putrid mix of blood, offal, and decay. It was the smell of death, and it filled him with a primal terror that he had never known.
This can't be real. It just can't be.
He blinked, trying to clear his vision, hoping that what he was seeing wasn't real, that it was just a figment of his imagination. But when he opened his eyes, the creature was still there, its grotesque grin widening, as if reading his terror. It took another step toward him, raising the meat hook slightly. The moonlight glinted off the sharp, curved metal, and Jake saw his own fear reflected in its cold, dead stare.
I have to do something. Anything.
He knew that he had to act, had to do something to defend himself. As the creature lunged, Jake remembered the poker he still clutched in his hand. Summoning a surge of adrenaline, he swung the poker with all his might, aiming for the creature's head. The poker connected with a sickening thud, but to Jake's horror, it didn't stop the creature. It was as if he had struck a solid wall of flesh and bone. The creature merely grunted, shaking its head as if annoyed by a pesky insect.
No, this can't be happening.
Jake stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never felt so utterly helpless, so completely outmatched. The creature advanced again, its movements slow and deliberate, like a predator toying with its prey. Jake swung the poker again and again, but each blow met with the same sickening thud, the same lack of effect. The creature seemed impervious to pain, driven by a hunger that Jake couldn't begin to comprehend.
Why won't you just go away?
He backed away, tripping over the leg of his desk and falling to the floor. The creature loomed over him, its breath hot and fetid on his face. Jake closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. But the blow never came. He opened his eyes to see the creature gone, vanished as quickly as it had appeared. He lay there for a moment, his chest heaving, trying to catch his breath. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing.
It's gone?
He slowly got to his feet, his legs shaking beneath him. He looked around the room, half expecting the creature to reappear, but it was gone. He was alone. He stumbled out of the room and down the stairs, his mind reeling. He had to get out of the house, get to somewhere safe. He fumbled with the lock on the front door, his hands trembling so violently that he could barely turn the key. He burst out of the house and into the night, running blindly through the darkness.
I have to get away, far away from that thing.
He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he had to get away from that house, from that thing. Days turned into weeks, and the terror of that night continued to haunt Jake. He couldn't shake the image of the creature's grotesque face from his mind, the stench of decay clinging to him like a shroud. He had tried to tell others, to warn them, but his words were met with skepticism and fear. He had become a recluse, afraid to leave his house, afraid of the darkness, afraid of what lurked just beyond the edges of his vision. He jumped at every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind.
I can't live like this, always looking over my shoulder.
Then one night, the phone rang. He stared at it, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he shouldn't answer, but he couldn't help himself. He picked up the receiver, his hand trembling.
Hello?
Missed me?